Somewhere in this file is a name that was erased on purpose.
Buenos Aires, a city of wide avenues and Parisian rooftops. A city that on the surface looks nothing like a haunted house, but walk into its center on a Thursday afternoon and you'll see women in white headscarves circling a stone obelisk in silence. They've done this for decades, not for policy, not for change. They're looking for their children. This is not a ghost story, it's worse. It's true. March 24th, 1976. Before dawn, tanks roll through the streets of Buenos Aires. Radios crackle with a single announcement. The armed forces have taken control of the government. President Isabel Perón is removed. A military junta led by General Jorge Rafael Videla now rules Argentina. They call it the Proceso de Reorganización Nacional, the process of national reorganization. A name stripped of blood, bureaucratic, clean. What it actually meant was this: for the next 7 years, anyone suspected of opposing the regime, students, union workers, journalists, teachers, pregnant women, teenagers, could be taken, not arrested, not charged, not tried, taken. Men in unmarked Ford Falcons without license plates would appear outside a home, a classroom, a workplace, in broad daylight or in the dead of night. A hand over the mouth, a hood over the head, a car door slamming, and then nothing. No paperwork, no court date, no body. They became known as Los Desaparecidos, the disappeared. Across Argentina, more than 300 clandestine detention centers were established, hidden inside police stations, military bases, and requisition buildings in the middle of ordinary neighborhoods. The most notorious was the Escuela de Mecánica de la Armada, ESMA, the Navy's own mechanics school, a stately building with columns and gardens, less than a mile from residential streets full of people walking dogs and buying bread. Inside, in rooms below ground level, thousands of prisoners were held, interrogated, and tortured. Survivors, and there were survivors, described electric shock torture known as the picana, mock executions, prolonged sleep deprivation, all conducted with bureaucratic routine, as if it were simply another shift at the office. Some prisoners were held for months. Some were released forever silent about what they'd seen. Most were never seen again. And here is the detail that turns history into something closer to a nightmare. Many of ESMA's staff went home each evening, to dinner, to their own children's bedtime stories, then returned the next morning to continue. The monster rarely announces itself. It wears a uniform. It keeps office hours. Perhaps the most horrifying method of disappearance came not from a room, but from the sky. Survivor testimony and later judicial investigations confirmed the existence of what became known as vuelos de la muerte, death flights. Prisoners, sometimes drugged into unconsciousness, sometimes fully awake, were loaded onto military aircraft, flown out over the Rio de la Plata or the Atlantic Ocean, and thrown from the plane into the water below. No graves, no headstones, no paper trail. The junta had, in effect, tried to erase people, not just from life, but from death itself. No burial, no mourning, no proof they had ever existed at all. For years, the ocean kept the secret. Then in the 2000s, bodies that had washed ashore decades earlier, buried anonymously as unidentified, were exhumed and identified through forensic and genetic analysis. The sea, it turned out, does not keep silence forever. In April 1977, a small group of mothers did something the regime had not planned for. They had spent months going door to door, police stations, churches, military offices, government ministries, asking the same question over and over: where is my son? Where is my daughter? They were met with denial, indifference, sometimes threats. So on April 30th, 1977, roughly 14 women, led in part by a mother named Azucena Villaflor de Vincenti, whose own son had been disappeared weeks earlier, Gathered in the Plaza de Mayo, directly in front of the Casa Rosada, the seat of government power, public gatherings of more than a few people were illegal under the state of siege. So the women did something quietly defiant. They walked, in pairs, in a slow circle around the plaza's central pyramid monument, not stopping, just walking together in the open, where everyone, including the generals watching from the palace windows, could see them. They returned the following Thursday. And the Thursday after that, they began wearing white cloth diapers on their heads, repurposed as headscarves, a symbol of the children they carried and the children that had been stolen from them. Some embroidered the names of their disappeared children into the fabric. The junta had built an entire machine designed to make people vanish without a trace. These women simply refused to disappear quietly in return. The regime could not ignore them forever. On December 10, 1977, Azucena Villaflor herself was abducted from outside her home. She was taken to ESMA, the very kind of building she had spent months trying to expose. She was never seen alive again. In 2005, forensic anthropologists identified skeletal remains that had washed up on a beach south of Buenos Aires decades earlier. Remains that had been buried in an unmarked grave as an unidentified body. DNA testing confirmed what her family had feared for nearly 3 decades. Azucena Villaflor had been one of the disappeared, thrown from a death flight into the sea. Her ashes were later placed at her family's wish in the ground of the Plaza de Mayo itself, the same plaza where she once walked in circles demanding answers. She never left the plaza. She simply became part of it. Here is where the horror deepens into something almost unimaginable. Among the thousands of disappeared were pregnant women. Rather than being killed immediately, many were kept alive in detention centers just long enough to give birth, often shackled, often without medical care beyond what was needed to keep the baby alive. Then, according to overwhelming documented testimony and later criminal convictions, the newborns were taken from their mothers, sometimes within hours of birth, and given away, handed to military families, handed to police officials, handed to friends of the regime, some of whom were told simply that the child had been rescued or found abandoned. Mothers in almost all documented cases were murdered shortly after. Estimates from human rights organizations suggest as many as 500 babies were born in captivity and taken this way. Many of these children grew up under false names, raised by the very institutions responsible for killing their birth parents. Many were never told the truth. Some still don't know it today. Out of this horror rose a second organization. Born from the first, the Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. While the mothers searched for their disappeared adult children, the grandmothers searched for something else entirely. The stolen grandchildren born in captivity, now growing up as strangers to their own bloodlines, sometimes just streets away from where their birth families still lived. With almost no institutional support, the grandmothers began building genealogical records, tracking rumors and working with sympathetic doctors and lawyers, and remarkably, helping pioneer the forensic use of DNA grandparentage testing in the 1980s. Methods still used in human rights investigations worldwide today. They created a national genetic databank so that any Argentine who suspected they might be a child of the disappeared could be tested. Even decades later, over 130 stolen grandchildren have been identified and reunited with their biological families since the search began. Many discovered the truth as adults, in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. After a lifetime inside someone else's stolen story, the search continues. There are still believed to be hundreds more out there unaware. The military dictatorship collapsed in 1983 following Argentina's defeat in the Falklands War. Democratic elections returned, and almost immediately the new government convened CONADEP, the National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons. Its final report, published in 1984, was titled Nunca Más, Never Again. It documented roughly 8,960 individual cases of forced disappearance by name. While human rights organizations, including the mothers themselves, have long argued the true number is significantly higher. Closer to 30,000 trials followed. Some military leaders, including Vidla, were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Amnesty laws later halted many prosecutions, laws that were themselves overturned by Argentina's Supreme Court in 2005. Trials continue into the present day. The mothers and the grandmothers are still walking, still asking. Some of the founding members have since died, never having learned what happened to their children. Others carry the walk forward in their place every Thursday. Same plaza, same slow circle. This is the part of the story where a horror film usually ends. The haunting resolved, the monster defeated, the credits roll. But real horror doesn't end that cleanly. The mothers of Plaza de Mayo never got most of their children back. The grandmothers are still searching decades later for grandchildren who may not even know to look for themselves. And somewhere in Argentina today, there may be a person living under a name that was never truly theirs, unaware that an entire family has been waiting for them their whole life. If there is a lesson in this story, it isn't about generals or coups or politics. It's about the mothers who wouldn't stop walking. The plaza is quiet now, but it remembers everything.